The muddy waters of the Mara River surged violently, carrying with them the scent of danger. In the middle of that chaos, a man clung desperately to life, but he wasn't alone. Strapped to his chest, claws digging into his wet shirt, was a tiny lion cub. Just ahead, 6 adult lions stood silently, their amber eyes fixed on him. Most people would call it a death sentence, to be trapped between a raging African river and a pride of lions. Yet what happened next was something no scientist, no wildlife expert, and no human alive could have ever imagined. This is the story of David Thompson, a wildlife photographer who broke his golden rule: never interfere with nature. And by doing so, he not only saved a young cub, but witnessed a display of animal intelligence, emotion and gratitude so extraordinary. It would change everything we thought we knew about lions. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because the pride's reaction will not only shock you, it may forever alter the way you see animals. David Thompson wasn't new to danger. At 34 years old, he had spent nearly a decade documenting life in Kenya's Masai Mara, one of the wildest, most unpredictable landscapes on Earth. His lens had captured everything: elephants charging across plains, cheetahs sprinting after gazelles, crocodiles snapping up unsuspecting wildebeests during migration. But through it all, David had one unshakable principle: observe, don't interfere. He had seen enough documentaries to know that nature had its own laws, far older and wiser than human sentiment. Predators killed, prey suffered, rivers swallowed the careless, and his job was to capture it, not change it. Friends often asked him, "Don't you ever feel like helping the animals?" David's answer was always the same: "If I step in once, I stop being a witness. I start being part of the story." And yet, on that fateful morning, with storm clouds still thick from a night of heavy rains, the Mara River forced him to break his own rule. Because no matter how disciplined he was, no human heart could ignore what he was about to see. The day began like any other. David set up his tripod near the swollen banks of the Mara. His camera aimed to catch wildebeests crossing the treacherous waters. The river was notorious this time of year, swollen, violent, and thick with crocodiles waiting beneath the surface. As he adjusted his lens, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Just a few meters upstream, a lion cub, no more than 4 months old, played dangerously close to the crumbling edge. Before David could even process it, the earth beneath the cub gave way. With a terrified squeal, the youngster tumbled into the raging current. David froze. He had seen predators kill prey. He had filmed calves swept away during migration. But this was different. This was not survival of the fittest. This was a helpless child, its tiny head bobbing frantically above the current, fighting for air. His instincts as a photographer screamed, "Don't interfere." But his instincts as a human silenced them instantly. Without a second thought, David dropped his camera and sprinted. "I couldn't just watch him drown," he would later say. At that moment, every rule, every ounce of training just disappeared. The river was like liquid muscle, a furious wall of brown water that resisted every stroke. The moment David plunged in, it dragged him downstream like a rag doll. Cold mud filled his mouth, debris slammed against his ribs, and his left shoulder exploded with pain as a submerged log struck him. For a moment, blackness threatened to take him. But then he heard it, the desperate cries of the cub. That sound pierced through his fear and pulled him back. Through blurred vision, he spotted the tiny animal, thrashing weakly, eyes wide with terror. Summoning strength he didn't know he had, David lunged forward, his arms cutting through the current. At last, his fingers brushed fur. Then with one desperate grab, he clutched the sodden cub and pulled it tight against his chest. The cub responded instantly, wrapping its tiny paws around his neck, claws digging in. Its body shook violently, its tiny heart pounding so hard David could feel it against his chest. Every stroke toward shore was a war. The current fought to drag them both into the crocodile pools downstream. His lungs burned, his arms screamed, his shoulder throbbed. But the cub clung tighter, its tiny breaths wet and shallow. Somehow, inch by inch, David pushed forward, fighting with everything he had left. When his feet finally scraped mud beneath him, he thought the worst was over. He was wrong, because waiting on the shore was something far more dangerous than the river. As David staggered toward the bank, gasping for air, the cub still pressed to his chest. He looked up and froze. There, emerging silently from the acacia trees, stood 5 lionesses. Their golden coats glistened under the sun, their eyes locked onto him. And then he saw the 6th figure. A massive male lion, his dark mane rippling, stood at the center. He was enormous, the kind of lion that dominated entire prides. His presence alone enough to silence the plains. David's heart sank. He knew lions. He had studied their behavior for years. They were fiercely protective of their young. And here he was, a human stranger clutching one of their cubs, trapped in waist-deep water, exhausted, with predators blocking his only escape. David realized he had no options. Any sudden move could trigger an attack that would end his life in seconds. The cub whimpered softly. The sound carried across the bank, and the lions stiffened. Their missing child had returned, but in the arms of a human. David braced himself. This was it. The matriarch lioness, larger, older, her body lined with scars, stepped forward. Her muscles rippled with every move. Her eyes, amber and unblinking, locked onto David. David's breath came shallow. Every instinct screamed, "Don't move." The lioness reached the edge of the river and stopped. The air was electric. The cub squirmed in David's arms, mewing desperately, and then something happened that defied every law of predator behavior David had ever studied. The lioness lowered her massive head. In what looked like a bow, David blinked. Was he imagining it? No. She held the position, her eyes never leaving his. In that moment, David felt something impossible, not threat, not hunger, but recognition. Step by step, the matriarch waded into the shallows. Water rippled around her paws as she approached within 3 feet. David's entire body tensed, ready for teeth and claws. Instead, she extended her head and pressed her rough tongue against his forehead. For a moment, time stopped. The lioness was grooming him, the same way she would clean her cubs. Behind her, the other lionesses relaxed. Their stiff posture softened, their tails swayed slowly. Even the massive male lowered himself into a resting position, a gesture of calm. David's camera, still strapped to his chest, recorded everything. The world would later see it, but in that moment, all David felt was awe. This predator, capable of ending his life in seconds, was instead treating him like one of her own. The grooming lasted only 30 seconds, but its meaning was unmistakable. To the pride, David was no longer an intruder. He was accepted temporarily as part of their family. The cub wriggled in his arms, reaching toward its mother. The matriarch responded with soft chuffing sounds, a gentle reassurance. David knelt slowly, placing the cub onto solid ground. What followed was a reunion so intimate, so emotional, it brought tears to his eyes. The matriarch rushed forward, nuzzling her cub, licking its tiny face, checking every inch of its body. The cub purred, chirping happily, safe once more. One by one, the other lionesses gathered, sniffing and grooming the youngster, their relief obvious. Finally, the massive male approached. He lowered his enormous head, touched the cub gently with his nose, and released a deep rumble, a father's approval. David sat frozen, surrounded by the most dangerous predators in Africa, but what he witnessed was not danger. It was love. When David finally rose to leave, he expected the lions to remain with their cub, but the matriarch had other plans. With a low call, she signaled the pride. Instantly, they formed 2 parallel lines, creating a clear pathway. The male lion moved to David's left, the matriarch to his right. The rest flanked him. It wasn't a threat. It was an escort. Step by step, David walked in the center of a lion honor guard, something no human had ever experienced. When they reached David's equipment, the pride stopped. The matriarch turned to him once more. Slowly, She pressed her forehead against his, the same greeting lions reserved for trusted Pride members. One by one, the others followed, brushing against him, touching him with their noses. Even the massive male lowered his head in acknowledgement. The cub, last of all, sat in front of David, tilted its tiny head, and mewed softly. It sounded like thank you. David's footage spread worldwide. Experts were stunned. Dr. Jane Goodall called it one of the most remarkable displays of interspecies communication ever recorded. Biologists analyzed the grooming gesture, the escort formation, the forehead press. All pointed to something revolutionary. Lions could recognize compassion and repay it with gratitude. In the Masai Mara, David became known as Simba's brother. Local guides told tourists his story with pride. Over the following months, David encountered the pride several times. Each time, the matriarch greeted him with a soft chuff. The cub he had saved, now growing strong, sometimes approached his vehicle without fear. A foundation was created in his name, dedicated to studying lion cognition and emotional intelligence. For David, the science mattered less than the truth he felt in his heart. That day, standing in muddy waters surrounded by predators, he had witnessed something greater than fear. He had seen gratitude, recognition, connection. It was proof that compassion is not limited to humans. It's a universal language, spoken by every living being willing to feel it, and perhaps that is the greatest shock of all. That in the heart of the African wild, a pride of lions showed us what it truly means to be human.